Garret, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Garret, you've been a flight attendant for 5 years with Alaska, and before that you were surfing.
Pretty
as
much,
you said,
yeah.
surfing the oceans. Cool. Could you make money surfing?
Yeah, if you're a pro, yeah.
Really? So you do competitions?
I never have, but yeah.
You just do that. Cool. And you live in Alaska these days?
I do.
That's an interesting place to live. So when did being a flight attendant enter your head ever? Were you born and you wanted to be a flight attendant, or were you not one of those people?
So yeah, it was kind of never on my radar.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. I was traveling the world and surfing, shooting weddings. I would do wedding photography on the side, you know, still to this day.
Uh-huh.
And I was kind of shooting weddings and living in Nicaragua, surfing, and I did a trip to Nepal and like kind of Japan and China. And my aunt is a flight attendant. She's been a flight attendant at Delta for 35 years.
Wow.
And she kind of put it in my head, hey, you know, you're kind of living this lifestyle that could, you know, eventually work into you being a flight attendant. You should kind of look into it. So when I came back I actually applied for Alaska Airlines in Nepal on a trip and put it out there, and 6 months later they called me for an interview and I was hired on, you know, that first day.
So you applied when you were
on a trip
abroad?
Yeah, abroad.
Thanks to the internet.
Thanks to the internet.
So you just submitted an application. Let's devote a few minutes to why Alaska versus other airlines, and because I know from the flight attendants I talked to, we all have our own reasons as to why we work for who. What was it that made you apply to Alaska?
Well, you know, luckily my aunt did all that research for me. You know, she told me pretty much that I should work for Alaska, and it was a good company, and I knew nothing about it. So without that research that she had, or inside knowledge of being in the aviation industry, I might have applied to Delta and all these other airlines and said, hey, what am I going to do? And now being in the industry and seeing the different schedules that people hold or different trips at things, I'm happy she did, and kept me kind of within that big international trips, big layovers, big things like that. But yeah, that's how it was.
Came across Alaska. Yeah. Where were you? Were you living in the States at the time, or?
I was living in Nicaragua before that trip, and on that trip I applied and I came back to the States and lived with my dad for a period of time. And then
where was your dad living?
In La Jolla, in San Diego.
In San Diego.
Yeah.
Okay, so Alaska. So I know different airlines have different bases in different places. Did they expect you to move? Were you able to stay in San Diego? How does all that work?
So when I was offered the job, they said, you know, the original interview was 5 bases. You could potentially get San Diego, LA, Anchorage, Portland, and actually the 4 bases. So yeah, so we could get those 4 bases. That was potential hiring spots. And, you know, in my head, of course, I wanted San Diego at that point. And, you know, when I was offered the job, and any one of those bases, you were going to go to training and then you would be awarded a base. And that was what I was told. And I course worked for San Diego, but in the end I got Anchorage.
You got Anchorage? Yeah. That's the opposite end.
Furthest away you could be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Alaska before going up there?
Never had.
So this was a new experience for you. So let's, we started with, you know, how you fell into flight attendant. Let's go back to the application process. So you submit your stuff online. And you mentioned briefly 6 months.
Yeah, it took about 6 months till I heard something back from Alaska. I know nowadays, after talking to new hires, that things are very different. Back then you put in the application, and whether they gave you a call or not was kind of in that radar, whether you even got invited to an interview. So at that point, back in that time, I was invited to an interview, which was with hundreds of people in a room, and you sat in this room and you went through kind of a video of what a day-to-day life would be like as a flight attendant, and they kind of watched your reaction and see, hey, what are you gonna do? Like, are you excited about that life? Are you not excited about the life? And you kind of watched all these interviewers walk around the room and look at you. And so then that interview took place down to multiple interviews within that day, and it ended up being a 9-hour day of getting interviewed in a group setting, getting interviewed in an individual setting, getting back interviewed into a group setting, back into another individual setting.
Over a span of 9 hours.
Over a span of 9 hours.
And in the meanwhile, you said you started out with hundreds. They're weeding people out.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're weeding people out along the process, and getting down to the final kind of group, and then they offered jobs to ended up being 12 of us.
Wow.
And that was it, you know. And then they said at that point, still you don't know where you're going to get hired, where your job is going to be, and they offer you a training spot in the next training class, and then you go to a training for 6 weeks.
So that day, by the end of that day, they let you know. They say, "We like you after passing all your stuff. We'd like to offer you a training spot in a class," and they give you a date.
Yep.
And obviously, you say yes. You make it work.
Yeah.
And how long following your that big interview in person? How long after that was your training class starting?
So I was hired in March, and it was about a 2.5 week period in April that I started my class.
So you had 2.5 weeks between getting hired and starting your class.
Yep.
And your class took place where?
In Seattle.
And you were living in San Diego.
I was living in San Diego.
So talk a little bit about the process of where do you stay? Do they put you up, and just training in general, and how long it's been before being in a classroom setting for you, and how was all that for you as far as flight attendant training is concerned?
Yeah. Well, I graduated college in 2006. So the last time I was in a classroom at that point would have been then. I don't even know the date. So 2013. So 6 years, I guess. Whatever that would have been. Yeah. And then if that matters, right?
6, 7 years. Okay.
So and then they put you up in a hotel in Seattle, and you get roomed with somebody. So you have a partner that is going to be your roommate for the entire trip. Entire duration of the training class. And my guy ended up being great, you know.
They put you up in a hotel?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a hotel with a kitchen and kind of like a little sitting area and 2 rooms and a bed.
Okay.
And, 2 rooms. Not ours was 2 rooms. Some other people had 1 room with 2 beds in it. They get set up in that situation, and they have everything set up for you. You get a per diem for the duration of the trip.
What's per diem?
So per diem is you get paid per day, whatever how many days you're there. So I don't forget what it was at that point, but maybe $30 a day, I think.
So you get a little bit of money to buy coffee and a little bit of food with.
Yeah. So it was like $30 a day. Ended up being like $200 a week or something. It was not very good, but it was enough to buy food and live. Because you were provided breakfast, and you just had to buy yourself lunch and dinner and whatever. And the coffee was in the morning, so they had those snacks all day in the training class. So we had training for 6 weeks and went through the training process. And about 3 weeks into it, they offered the bases, so you're awarded a base about halfway through it.
So 3 weeks in, they say, how does that work? They let you know what bases are available and you bid for it? Or?
Correct, yeah. So exactly. So then a bid will come out and they say, hey, this is what the positions that we have left in these bases. And in our case, it was LA and Anchorage that were available. And 5 people in our class got LA, and I put in Anchorage because in person I didn't want to drive to LA and commute from San Diego. Even if I was in San Diego, it's closer. Mm-hmm. But that 2-hour drive or whatever it would have been to deal with that would have been way harder in my life than it would have been to just move to Anchorage and start new. And
that's one way of looking at it, and many people do that.
Yeah, many people do it. It's just easier to deal with your...
Just get up and move.
Just get up and move and not deal with the whole process of going back and forth moving things. So I chose Anchorage. I got Anchorage and went through a 6-week period. Tons of people, for me, it wasn't that hard of a thing to go back into the classroom setting, and I did well and passed. And
you were flight attendant. Yeah. How many people did you have in that training class?
41 in my class.
41 people. Yeah. So you show up on day 1. Did you know anyone?
Did not know a person.
So you show up and you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
So you start shaking hands, and you introduce yourself, and you begin a 6-week long training program with people you don't know. Yeah. let's talk a minute about the ages.
Yeah.
Some people out there might be curious, when flight attendants get hired. And I know, at least myself, at some point in my life, I thought that if you're over 30, you lost your window.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
So certain airlines, yes, it is the case.
Okay.
And kind of a lot of more of the Western airlines, yes, we have 21-year-olds. So you have to be at least 21 to be hired by Alaska Airlines or any kind of flight attendant you're serving alcohol. But 21 to all the way to sometimes 60-year-olds.
60-year-olds get hired.
Yeah.
So if there's someone out there who's 60 years old right now, they just retired their previous job, and they wish to become a flight attendant, the chances are quite high you're saying that the airline will hire them, if they're good people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance, yes. I would say quite high, but yes, there's a chance.
So they have the ability to get hired.
Yeah, there's definitely an ability to get hired.
And that's something that I at least didn't know beforehand. So that's pretty cool. So you go through the training, you graduate, I'm assuming a bunch of tests.
Yep.
In training,
Yeah.
You graduate, and then what? What's after?
Depending on whatever you have in your life at that point. So if somebody was, let's say there's lots of moms in this case that got based in Anchorage and they have a life in Seattle or they have a life wherever, they have to put their life in order for, we had a 2-week period before our first day of actual work started. They'd have to go put their life in order and decide how they're going to pursue this life by being Anchorage based for the times that they're working.
Because just like yourself, these moms are living in Seattle and in other places other than Anchorage.
Yeah. So they have a huge, they might have more responsibilities. In my case, I did not. And it was an easy shift for me. Whereas some people, yes, if they have a whole other life somewhere, they're going to have to decide how they're going to routine their life. And by commuting or by getting things like a crash pad, which are where tons of flight attendants come together to live in one place so they can afford it.
I'm glad you explained that, because my next question was, what is a crash pad?
Yeah, so they have a crash pad of, so at one point when I was Seattle based, when I actually moved back down to Seattle, I had a crash pad that had 12 people in my room. So one single room with 12 people, 6 bunk beds. And the other room had 6 bunk beds as well. And there was 12 people in each room, so 24 people, and it made it a very affordable place to live and get by until you worked, and then you would get on and then you would go back to your home. And so a lot of people do things like this, or they'll get a crash pad with 3 other people. That makes it, more affordable for rent, but it's more private. And
so there's many ways about, living places, but when you start out and you have a house in one city and you're based in another city, it's a cheap way to get by.
It's a cheap way to get by because you're going to have a mortgage or you're going to have rent and you have obligations to other people. You have to figure out how you're going to afford that, in the beginning, making not as much money as you want to.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that's awesome. So you graduate, you become a flight attendant. How long after graduation are you a legit flight attendant on a plane, on your own, serving drinks and doing what it is you dreamt of or applied to do? So
instantly you're a flight attendant, but you have to go through a 6-month period of a probation.
Probation period.
Where you're actually, official employee, but you're a flight attendant acting on the safety duties, you're acting on all these things as a flight attendant.
As a flight attendant. What is this probationary period that flight attendants go through?
Through that period for us it's 6 months. Through that period if you make a mistake or you don't show up to work or an incident happens, you're accountable for that in a different way than you are as a flight attendant who is past probation, where you can be fired at any point. You can be let go for many reasons depending on your personality, your interactions with other flight attendants. It's a period in which you're easily kind of discarded, let's call it.
So it's like a test run for the airline to make sure that they're happy with who they hire.
Yeah. So
it's basically and it sounds like it's the time for the flight attendant to also check out the airline because no one's in prison, and some airlines might be a better fit for some than others. Cool. So you passed probation, and then did you stay for the 5 years in Anchorage?
Yeah. So after there was really no base openings So when I got hired, there was no trend. So what happens originally, what was happening with Alaska Airlines is that when a class was entered into the system, there was a transfer. And so meaning that somebody that wants to be in Anchorage could be somewhere else if they put their transfer in, and their seniority, meaning how long they've been with the company, lets them get to a different base. At the point when I was hired, there was no offers of that because there was no classes coming through.
So you could only leave a base to another base when the company lets everyone know that we have an opening in one spot, and you're able to put in a request
for it. And if you're senior enough in that opening, and somebody else didn't want it before you, then you would get awarded that base. And when I did it, I didn't have an opening for 5 months, and then it took me another. Yeah, there was no openings for 5 months, and I got a transfer to Seattle because I thought it would be closer to San Diego and I could commute back and forth until I was awarded a San Diego base. And at that point, I moved to Seattle, and I got the crash pad, like I was saying. And
then you were Seattle based.
Yeah.
Let's shift and talk about a flight attendant schedule. I know there's what's called reserve versus holding a line. What would be the difference between the two? And I know different airlines do them in different ways.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what a flight attendant could expect when starting out with an airline as far as their schedule is concerned, and how that all works.
Yeah. So on reserve. So originally, when you get on, you're gonna hired by Alaska. You're gonna be on reserve. You're gonna have to go onto a schedule where you're awarded a block of days. So it's either a 3-day block, a 4-day block, sometimes a 2-day block, sometimes a 1-day block. Depends on how your seniority lies in your class that you were hired with, and also what the airline kind of needs in that period of time to have enough reserves on the schedule so that they're covered. So in that block of days, so say you come online for 1 month and you have your first block of 3 days. So that person's going to see that block of 3 days, and they're going to be on a thing called AM reserve or PM reserve. And that time is going to be midnight to 2 in the afternoon, and then 2 in the afternoon to midnight. So that person is either going to have one of the other blocks, whatever they bid, and they're going to be called out potentially for a churn.
So reserve is like you're on call, and you're at the airline has full control over what you're working within that specified time period that you just mentioned.
Yep. So that person they're on call. They're at the beck and call, whatever is happening. So if it's a churn, if it's sometimes airport standby, well, the person will go sit at the airport for 4 hours and 5 hours now, actually. So go sit at the airport for 5 hours and wait for potentially a call to go do something, or potentially to go board a plane, or just to be on call if somebody calls out sick and they need somebody to go somewhere.
So that would mean that the person is notified by the scheduling to come out to the airport and sit there for 5 hours, and then they have to keep their phone on in case they get called to work a trip or do anything.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
So in that period of time, they have to be available to do whatever they need. Their scheduling need is.
And that I think is a very important thing for people to keep in mind who want to start out with this job. And we'll talk in a moment how long it lasts for. And I know every airline is different, but even if it lasts for a year, it sounds like it's not easy.
No, you're at the beck and call. You don't know what you're doing, and at any given day, you don't know what you're doing. So that 3-day block could turn into a 1 airport standby. You're sitting at the airport for 5 hours. And say you boarded 4 planes. And you boarded 4 planes and you've gone home and you didn't do anything else but that today. That was your day. It was done. And the next day you get called so that night you go home, you say you get called at 1 in the morning, and they say, hey, we have a flight for you. You're going to come in to fly this churn at 6 in the morning. We need you to have a 5 a.m. report. Your 5 a.m. report's here, and then you're going to show up at the airport the next morning, 5 a.m. after you've just gone home from that 5-hour sit at the airport, and you're going to go do this churn. And now your block. Now you come back from that churn at 3 in the afternoon, let's say.
Now, just real quick for those who don't know, what does a turn mean?
Yeah, so a turn is like in the airline industry, you're going to go away from your base, wherever it is. You're going to maybe do 3 legs in that day, maybe 2, maybe just one leg to somewhere, and then you come right back to your base, and that's a churn. So anything that leaves your base and comes back to your base in the same day is a churn.
Without staying in a hotel.
Without staying
in the middle.
hotel. Yeah.
That would be a turn. Okay. So that's reserve life. How long, let's talk about Alaska. How long would that typically, I know it always changes, how long would that last for? How long could someone expect for that to last for?
Yeah, so, I mean, when I started an Anchorage base, it was 1 month on reserve.
Wow,
And
okay.
it was super quick. Nowadays, it's 1 year on reserve in Anchorage.
Quite a difference.
Is a huge difference. So that shows you how much the aviation industry will change in a given period of time. Mm-hmm. So it could be a month all the way up to 6 years prior to what I was hired. So
and that is something to keep in mind because you might get hired at a time where it's 1 year, but then 6 months in it switched to 3 years. So that sounds like it could fluctuate day to day.
Point, yeah. So say, hey, they had a huge. There's so many fluctuations. Aviation is changing constantly.
Wow. Yeah. So you after 1 month you get what's called a line.
Yep.
What does holding a line mean? What changes?
So you know exactly what you're going to work. So your schedule now shows, and then instead of blocks of days off, it shows trips. So a trip would be something like, it's going to show me going to Vegas. I'm going to go to Las Vegas for the day, and I'm going to lay over, then I'm going to come back to Anchorage. That shows.
Now layover means I stay in a hotel and I have a specified number of hours.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you come back to your base. And it could be a 3-day trip, which means you stay in a hotel 2 nights. It could be a 4-day trip. You stay at a hotel 3 nights. Or it could be just a 2-day, 1 night away, and then you come back home. So now my schedule looks like I see exactly what I'm doing for the month, and it's there, and I can have the ability to change it a little bit more than a reserve schedule, because I can trade trips easier. I can do other things that makes my lifestyle fit my life instead of just like I'm at their call.
So it sounds like probably the biggest difference between being on reserve, on call, and holding a line is control over your schedule.
Yeah.
And being at your own begging call than the airline's begging call. And then, so once you graduate, quote unquote, and hold a line, is it new people who come under you and start reserve?
Yeah.
So it's basically, so when we talk about the needs, the time someone will spend on reserve or not, it basically has to do with the amount that the airline is hiring and things like that. So as we're talking about trips and routes, how does all that work? Do you have any control over where you'll fly to? What if you have a family member in a specific city? Let's talk a little bit about the control that you have on your end as a flight attendant as to where you'll be going.
So yeah, the more time you put into the company, the more senior you get, is what we call a seniority thing. And when you get more senior into the company, you have more control of what you will end up doing. You can bid things that you will be awarded. So like in the beginning of the month, I'm going to bid my trips that I would like to fly. And whether my seniority can hold that or not will allow me to get those trips or not. And now after a few years of flying, I can get mostly what I would like to fly than what I wouldn't want to like to fly. And so as that happens, put more time in the company, you get a lot more things that you like.
So basically, and how often do you bid?
Every month.
Every month. So the entire airline all ask for what they want, and then everything is awarded based off, it goes from the most senior person and so on.
And trickles down all the way.
So it sounds like for someone to be aware of what they're able to bid and hold is important too, so they don't overdo it. So you get a feel for that. So we all know that when we fly on airplanes, there's more than one flight attendant. Why is there 4 versus 3? How does that work? And also, are there positions assigned to each flight attendant? How is all that broken down if people who don't specifically know the behind the scenes of flight attendants on board?
Right. Yeah. There's a federal regulation that makes there be 1 flight attendant per 50 people. So if we have a flight with 190 people, we need 4 flight attendants. And that's just a federal regulation thing. And there is positions awarded. So each person potentially could like to fly a certain position. there's an A position in the very front of the plane, and there's a B position, which is typically the person who works in the middle of the plane, and the C that works in the back, and then a D that kind of just helps out where needed.
So there's different positions of flight attendant, and each one has a job assigned to them.
Correct. Yeah.
And the passengers might not be aware of that, but there's all that going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to bidding and having control over what trips you'll work and places you'll go, does a flight attendant have control over what position they'll work on the plane?
Yeah. So again, in seniority type of thing, the more senior you get, the more control you have of what position you would like to fly. And so on top of that, also what trip you want to fly. So you might be able to hold a trip that has an A position available, which means the lead flight attendant.
And that's in first class?
Yeah, it's in first class.
Okay.
That you might be able to hold if you were willing to work that position. But if you're not willing to work that position because you don't like it for some reason, then you won't get that trip. So there's a lot of like really intricate details that become really complex when you're...
So if you're willing to work this position on a plane, you might be able to get that trip.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to work that, are there any job misconceptions that you could think of that people might have, or anything that you had and you found out to be?
Yeah. I mean, no. I mean, I guess like, people think it's glamorous, and it's not in any way.
It's not glamorous.
No. So I mean, if you think it's glamorous for people just when you walk by, try to push trash in your face, and that's glamorous. It's glamorous if you're just a trash can, and like by the time you get to a hotel, typically you're exhausted and you don't want to go and explore the cities and do things, and after a period of time at least, but that's just whatever. But
does the body adapt to the environment that you work in the more you do it? Do you ever get used to turbulence, or ever get used to just being on a plane is tiring? Does that ever get better?
Yeah, I mean, it does. Yeah, I think of it. Everybody adapts. It took me, I got like vertigo for the first year working.
Wow.
Got this weird vertigo feeling, and then it went away.
It went away. So it changed. Let's talk not specific numbers, but I know every job is different when it comes to pay. And we have what's called a pay scale.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What could one expect? And we could also throw in the concept of contracts, how they change a few years. So let's talk a little bit about the pay system that one could expect becoming a flight attendant.
Well, I mean, again, so fluctuation and change. I mean, when I was hired, I was making $16.01 an hour, or $16.01 a TFP, so we call it trips per pay. And then we got a new contract, and I was immediately making $21.71 a TFP, so I got a $4
increase.
$5 increase right away.
Okay.
And so then as the pay steps go up, you make each pay scale, each year you've been at the company, you make a little bit more money, and it's guaranteed. You don't have to do a good job or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like you're just getting a guaranteed pay increase.
As long as you're there.
As long as you're there.
You every year that goes by, you reach your pay scale.
So it's not like a business, like, hey, gotta go to your boss. Do I get a pay raise or what? It's just gonna happen.
So it sounds like it's not performance based. It's just how long you've been around.
Exactly.
So that's an upside probably to some people would be happy to hear that.
Yeah. So every year, you get a pay increase, and I'm making like 32 an hour, 32 a TFP, and it's better. Yeah, make more money, and I can live better.
Absolutely. Yeah. So every year it goes up. So that's what people could expect on the money side of things. Let's briefly just touch on benefits, and specifically flight benefits, because I know that many people out there, probably a big reason, at least for people that I meet, for joining the airline in general, has to do with, I could fly for free.
Yeah.
So when people say flight benefits, what are they referring to? What does flying for free really look like when it comes down to it?
Yeah.
How does all that work?
Well, so we have a thing called we non-rev on our airline, and that part is completely free, correct? And it's space available, so meaning if there's an open seat for you to sit in, you're gonna get it, as long as, again, you have you're senior enough to hold that position in front of somebody else that might be trying to non-rev on that same flight. And that seat might be a middle seat in the middle of two people that are really horrible people, maybe, and you have to deal with it and be very nice about it. And so yeah, I mean, yes, you get free flights, and sometimes it's the last thing you want to do after working for 5 days, go fly on another plane somewhere else to go do something. And other times it's amazing and you have a great experience. So after a 6-month period of probation, you have the privilege to do this internationally.
So you could now fly for free on airlines internationally?
Internationally on other airlines. And
okay.
You get a thing called a Z fare, which we pay a portion of the taxes to the airline that we're flying on to go fly on their airline on standby again. The same exact thing, this whatever seat's available. And
so in order to get on standby, it sounds like there first have to be open seats on the plane.
Yeah.
So a plane that's completely full with paying passengers and you are flying standby with your flight benefits, you won't get on because you need to have a seat.
Yep.
So you want to hope for a plane with open seats, and then based off seniority again, it sounds like everything in the industry is seniority based.
Yep.
And that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And so then you'll get on. And you briefly touched on, which is I think so true, that prior to becoming a flight attendant, flying for free is exciting.
Yeah.
But then if you work on a plane all day long, after 5 days of working on a plane, you probably don't want to spend time on a plane sitting.
It's hard sometimes, yes.
Cool. Let's. So now you're a flight attendant. You've done it for quite a few years. Here's something that here's a area that I personally know quite a few people out there who know a lot about what a flight attendant is about. Don't know this part, and that is recurrent annual training. Because some people I talk to, they always thought that you go through initial training, you become a flight attendant, and then you just do that for as long as you want to do that. What does a recurring training consist of, and how does that work, at least at Alaska?
Yeah. Well, every year we go to recurrent training, so we'll have to go through CPR training again, go through AED training again, which is then we'll have to go through the normal door opening and emergency procedures that we have to go through, and go through security issues. That's the whole kind of thing wrapped up in one day, like a whole initial training wrapped in one day.
So it takes one day to do your recurrent training.
Yep.
And it's every year. And does it occur in the same month each year, or?
Yeah, for everybody, whatever year they were hired, whatever month they were hired in, they get recurrent training in that same month.
So you come back into the airline training center, and it's 1 day long training. How many people typically are in a recurrent class?
I think here in Seattle, you guys have quite a bit, like 80 people or something like that. Up in Anchorage, we got maybe 5 or 6 sometimes. 5
or 6 people. So it's quite different than the initial training class setting. But that is something to keep in mind, where every year you have to pass, and there's a test.
Oh yeah. I forgot that part.
Yeah, and you have to pass the test, and then you could remain a flight attendant.
Yep.
So it's not a lot, but it's a little bit. One thing that many people know about the job to be true, we talked about how many people get on for the flight benefits. I think another popular reason, and I think you might agree, is the flexibility that the job offers. On the one hand, there's a lot of talk of how people could expect and should expect to be away for their children's birthdays. But then on the other hand, talk a little bit about how things could get better and maybe do get better once you gain a little bit of seniority.
Yeah, so once you do gain a little bit of seniority and you put some time in, you've gone through that reserve part of it, you've gone through crash padding part of it, gone through some of the really rough times, you have a lot of flexibility in your life. You can literally be working for 2 weeks straight and then be off for 2 weeks. You can work for a week and then be off for a week. You can really tailor your schedule to your needs, and depending on your base, again, on these seniority type of things. So in Anchorage, I can pretty much do a lot of things I would like to do and just make it work. And that's because I work in a base that's less populated.
Right. So once you go through the initial, being at the begging call of the airline and getting control over your schedule, you could start being around for birthdays if you chose to, and things do get better.
Yeah, holidays, all those things, it becomes easier to do.
So it sounds like all the maybe tough things that new flight attendants might have to get through, it does get better.
Yeah.
Things do, you gain more control over things, and eventually you reach a point. It's again back to the seniority thing. It sounds like within this industry, everything is seniority based. Cool. So in the name of wrapping things up, hopefully we covered as many topics, not too deeply, that we could cover. What would you tell after doing this for 5 years? What are a few pointers you tell someone who's maybe looking into becoming a flight attendant to keep in mind as they look into this new job and lifestyle, and maybe they might be looking to commute, which is something you haven't done. It sounds like you moved to Anchorage. What are some things you would, from your perspective today, tell someone who might be looking for information?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest information, I guess, would be you have to be really open to do this job. You have to be really open to adapt to different changes and not have control of what you're gonna do. And I think, I mean, like doing this show, I think it's the only thing that I Googled some things and was not able to find a lot on being a flight attendant. And I think, I mean, more than anything, it's looking for being an open person. And
and just covering the topics we covered, we did come back a lot to, there will be some times where the control you'll have over things is very limited, but you get through it, and we've all been there and we've all done that. So yeah, that's a huge thing. Last question: did you have fun, Garret?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.